Okay, be honest. Have you ever gotten lost in that social media scroll? Like hours just disappear, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And it's funny because this video we shared, the one with the native English speakers talking about social media, it really gets at that, especially for students.
Right.
But then, I mean, you kind of threw in this curveball with the whole love marriage versus arranged marriage thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, at first you think those are like totally separate topics,
Right.
but going through all this, these sources, a theme just kept popping up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's about making these intentional choices, and that's kind of in both, if we're talking swiping right or we're
Mhm.
talking scrolling forever.
Okay, you've definitely got my attention now. So let's start with the social media stuff. These speakers, they're not just like, predicting the end of the world because of our phones, are they?
No, no, not at all.
They even admit to feeling that pull themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They even use the word addiction, which, I mean, maybe sounds a bit extreme, but then they tell this story about Anna. She's a student who actually, failed an exam because she was on social media too much.
Wow.
So it kind of makes you realize those little moments online, they can have, real consequences.
Yeah, like death by a thousand likes or something. But here's what I don't get. We all know social media is like designed to be addictive, right?
Right.
So why are we so susceptible to it?
I mean, it's not just about willpower,
Mhm.
They actually bring up some psychological models, and one that really stuck with me is the fog behavior model.
Okay.
It basically says that for you to actually do something, like a behavior, you need three things: motivation, ability, and a trigger.
Hmm.
And social media, it's almost like it's engineered to hit all three of those perfectly.
Okay, so break that down for me. Like, how does that actually work?
So the motivation that comes from wanting to connect with people or getting validation or sometimes just being bored,
Yeah.
and then ability. I mean, our phones are always right there. It's so easy.
Sure.
And triggers. You've got notifications, those little red dots. It's nonstop.
It's like they're everywhere.
It's no wonder we just get sucked right back in.
So it's not just us being weak, it's almost like it's messing with how our brains are wired, right?
Exactly.
But the good news is, at least in this video, these speakers, they offer some pretty good advice to fight back a bit.
Yeah, and it's not just the typical delete the app kind of stuff.
Right.
They talk about setting time limits,
Yeah.
like actually being intentional about it.
Yeah.
Almost like you're making a budget, but with your attention. One person even talked about like scheduling specific times for social media so it doesn't just take over every free moment.
That's a good idea. They also really stressed, I remember, being careful about who you follow. I know I've been there. You start comparing yourself, and then it's just this spiral of like envy.
Yeah.
Everyone's life looks perfect online.
And that's where the whole intentional choice thing comes in. It's like, are those accounts that you're following, are they actually doing something good for you? Or are they just making you feel bad?
Right.
Maybe it's time to clean up who you follow.
It's almost like Marie Kondoing your social media feed. Like, I love that. But what really struck me, honestly, was the idea of taking breaks from social media,
Yeah.
like really logging off.
Yeah, like for a whole day
Yeah.
or even a week. Some people were even doing it longer.
Wow.
And they said it actually helped them like reconnect with what was important to them,
Oh, that's interesting.
like their values and stuff. It's like hitting that reset button.
Yeah. Yeah, we all need that sometimes.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've covered all the social media worries. Now I got to ask, what about this marriage debate? How did you link that to intentional choices?
Well, think about it. Both sides, whether it's love marriage or arranged marriage, they want the relationship to work out in the long run.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
It's just they have different ways of getting there. And that's where I saw the connection to, those intentional choices we were talking about with social media.
Whoa. Okay, now I'm seeing it. So what are the main arguments for each side?
So for love marriage, the video really focuses on personal choice, like having the freedom to choose, and of course that romantic love, that spark.
Yeah, right.
It's about picking someone based on, how you feel about them and what you've been through together.
And I remember they even brought up that student, the one who was heartbroken, who got so caught up in her relationship that her schoolwork suffered.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's almost like a warning, right? About letting emotions take over.
totally. It shows how even when we think we're being intentional, sometimes our feelings can kind of cloud our judgment.
Yeah, that's true.
But then when they talk about arranged marriage, the focus shifts to a different kind of intentionality.
Okay, tell me more.
They talk about how families and the community get involved. They look at things like, do the backgrounds match? Are their values similar? Even their long-term goals.
It was more strategic.
Yeah, like a bigger picture kind of
Mhm.
approach. They're not just going with that initial, rush of falling in love.
So it's less about like Cupid's arrow and more about planning it out carefully.
Exactly. And to be honest, both sides make some good points.
Yeah.
It's just that what being intentional means kind of depends on what you believe in and what your culture is like.
I'm seriously mind blown right now.
Yeah.
So we've got intentional scrolling, intentional relationships. Is there anything this doesn't apply to?
That's a good question. And actually, it goes even deeper than we initially thought. But maybe before we get to that,
Okay.
we should look at how these intentional choices, how they actually work in real life.
Okay, I'm really starting to see how this intentionality idea connects everything, like our online habits and our relationships.
Right.
But to be honest, it's a lot to think about, you know? Where do we even start with applying this, like in real life?
It's funny you say that because even in the video, they talk about this feeling of being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
One of the speakers brought up this term, decision fatigue.
Okay.
It's like we only have so much energy for making decisions.
Right.
And with so many options all the time, it's easy to sort of shut down and go on autopilot.
Oh, tell me about it. I mean, even just picking a cereal at the store is like a major decision these days.
Exactly. So we're already overwhelmed, and then it's even harder to, be intentional on top of that.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Being intentional, it doesn't mean you have to make, the perfect choice every single time.
Okay, good there.
It's more about, a way of thinking, a way of approaching decisions
Oh, okay.
and focusing on what really matters to you.
So less about having like a master plan and more about having some guiding principles, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that principle could be something as simple as asking yourself, does this choice fit with my values? Or does this help me get closer to my goals?
That makes sense. So in the video, like, how did those speakers actually use this idea of intentionality?
Well, remember those tips for social media we talked about?
Yeah.
They weren't just random things to do. They were tied to what the speakers cared about.
Right.
For example, one person wanted to be more present with her family.
Okay.
So she decided to have tech-free evenings.
Oh, I like that. So it's about connecting those choices to a bigger why, right?
Exactly.
It's not just, I should limit my screen time. It's, I want to be more connected with my family, so I'm choosing to put my phone away during dinner.
Yeah, that's it. And for relationships, the people who like the idea of love marriage, they talked about choosing a partner based on qualities, not just looks.
It's like having a vision board for your ideal partner. Like,
Yep.
who do I actually want to be with?
Exactly. And for those who liked arranged marriage, they were intentional about trusting the system,
Okay.
that their family and community would choose well for them.
So it's about believing that they have your best interests at heart, even if you don't see it right away.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing how this one idea can look so different depending on the situation.
Yeah, it really is. But it always comes back to making choices that fit with what you value and what you want to achieve.
Exactly. And we have to remember, being intentional isn't a one-time thing.
Right.
It's like an ongoing process.
Okay.
Reflecting, adjusting, and sometimes, changing direction completely.
So it's okay to make mistakes, to learn as you go.
Oh, absolutely. It's about progress,
Mm-hmm.
not being perfect, and it's about the journey, not just the end goal.
You know, it's like we always think of success as this straight line,
Yeah,
but maybe it's more about making those intentional choices at each step, even if they take you in a totally different direction.
I love that.
Yeah.
And you know what? Sometimes those unexpected detours,
Mm.
that's where the really great stuff happens.
I think our listener is starting to see things in a new way now, you know?
Yeah, I hope so.
It's like all those everyday choices now have so much more meaning.
That's the power of being intentional,
Yeah.
It helps us create a life that feels good and that has meaning.
Okay, I'm definitely feeling inspired, ready to tackle the week with a whole new outlook. But before we go too far, how do we actually start being more intentional?
Well, the first step is probably the simplest, but it's often the hardest.
Okay, what is it?
Self-reflection.
Wait, like sitting on a mountaintop, meditating kind of stuff?
No, not necessarily. It could just be taking a few minutes to write in a journal, or even just having a conversation with yourself
Okay.
about what really matters to you. Like, what are your values? What makes you happy? What do you want to do with your life?
Once you know those things, it's got to be easier to make choices that fit,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And it doesn't have to be this huge thing. You don't have to change your whole life at once.
Okay, okay.
Just start with one small area where you want to be more intentional.
Right.
Maybe it's social media or how you spend money or your relationships.
It's like those little habits people talk about. One small change can make a big difference. But is there any downside to all this intentionality stuff? Like, can you be too intentional?
That's a great question. And the video actually talks about that a little bit.
Oh, really?
One speaker said that if you focus too much on planning and controlling everything, it can actually kill spontaneity and joy.
So you might miss out on those unexpected moments that make life fun, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
about finding that balance, being intentional, but not being rigid,
Okay.
being open to new things, but also having that clear sense of purpose. And we have to be kind to ourselves when things don't go perfectly,
Yeah,
because we all make mistakes sometimes.
that's true. But I guess the important thing is to learn from those mistakes
Right.
and try to keep making choices that align with, the best version of ourselves. I feel like this whole conversation has given me a new way to think about making decisions.
Yeah.
Both the big ones and the little ones. What about you?
Oh, for sure. This whole thing about intentionality, it's been really eye-opening for me too.
Yeah, me too. It's like I have a whole new framework for thinking about choices now. But okay, back to the video for a second. Did the speakers talk about like how to actually make this intentionality thing work over
Yeah.
time?
They did. One of them actually mentioned how what they were being intentional about had changed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like it shifted over time. They went from focusing on work and career stuff to more family and like well-being.
So as their life changed, what they valued changed too.
Exactly. It's like what matters to you at 20 is different at 40.
Totally. And if you don't realize that's happening, you might end up chasing goals that don't even make sense anymore.
Right. So it's important to recognize those changes, to make choices that really work for you, not for some old version of yourself.
It's like we always talk about finding our purpose, right?
Yeah.
But maybe it's not about finding it, but more about like creating it as you go.
I love that. It's not about some big predetermined plan. It's about building it day by day, choice by choice.
And that goes back to what we were saying before about not needing to have all the answers right away.
Exactly.
It's okay to try things out, to change direction if you need to.
You got to be open to new things,
Yeah.
to step outside that comfort zone. That's where you find the really cool stuff.
You know what? This is making me realize that intentionality isn't just about like making good decisions.
It's bigger than that.
Yeah, it's about being aware and realizing you have the power to change things.
You're not just along for the ride. You're driving. And that can be so powerful.
It changes how you see everything, from your relationships to your work, everything.
Yeah,
I think our listeners really picking up on that too. They're probably thinking about all this in a whole new way.
I hope so. That's what we want, right? To help people live more intentionally, more deliberately, more fully.
Well said. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive for today. But before we sign off, I want to thank you, the listener, for coming along with us on this journey.
It's been awesome exploring all this with you.
And remember, this conversation isn't over just because the episode is ending. Think about these ideas, see how they fit into your own life, and see what happens.
Keep learning, keep making those choices, keep creating the life you want.
We'll catch you next time.